The scream that tore through the mountain silence made Clara Jenkins drop the bucket of water she'd been carrying from the creek, ice-cold liquid soaking through her worn leather boots as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stood frozen for a heartbeat before realizing the sound had come from her own throat, ripped from her lungs by the sight of the stranger standing in the doorway of her cabin, his filthy hand already reaching for the latch she had foolishly left unlocked while fetching water in the bright afternoon sun. "Well now, what do we have here?" The man's voice slithered across the clearing like a rattlesnake through dry grass, and Clara's fingers instinctively moved toward the hunting knife she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her skirts. "Mighty pretty thing, all alone up here in these mountains. That does not seem safe, does it?" The year was 1879, and Clara had been living in the cabin nestled in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico Territory for 3 months now, ever since her father had died of pneumonia during the brutal winter. She had stayed because this was home, because she had nowhere else to go, and because Colton Mackenzie had promised he would return from his trapping expedition before the summer heat settled into the valleys below. He had been gone for 2 weeks, tracking elk and beaver through the higher elevations, and she had managed well enough on her own until this moment. "You need to leave," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. She was 22 years old, tall and strong from years of mountain living, with honey-colored hair she kept braided down her back and green eyes that had learned to read weather patterns and animal tracks before she could read books. "This is private property, and you are trespassing." The drifter laughed, revealing teeth stained brown from tobacco and neglect. He was thin but wiry, with the desperate look of a man who had been running from something for a long time. His clothes were covered in trail dust, and a revolver hung low on his hip, the leather holster worn smooth from use. "Private property? Little lady, there are no laws up here, no sheriffs, no witnesses, just you and me and all this pretty solitude." He stepped fully into the doorway, blocking her path to the cabin and everything inside it, including the rifle her father had left her, the rifle she should have been carrying with her down to the creek. Clara cursed herself silently for growing complacent, for forgetting that danger could arrive without warning even in the most beautiful places. "I said leave." Clara drew the hunting knife from its sheath, the blade catching the sunlight that filtered through the pine trees surrounding her home. The cabin sat in a natural clearing at nearly 8,000 feet, with a view that stretched for miles down into the valleys where settlements, like Glen Rio, sat along the borders between New Mexico and Texas. But that view meant nothing now, not with this stranger between her and safety. The drifter's eyes narrowed, but his smile never wavered. "Now that is no way to greet a visitor. I have been riding for days without a proper meal or a soft place to rest. Surely a kind woman like yourself would not turn away a weary traveler." "I am not kind, and you are not a traveler. You are a drifter looking for trouble." Clara began backing toward the tree line, calculating her chances. She knew these woods better than anyone except Colton, knew every game trail and hiding spot. If she could make it to the trees, she might be able to lose him in the thick undergrowth of scrub oak and pine. But the drifter was faster than his lean frame suggested. He lunged forward with surprising speed, closing the distance between them before Clara could turn and run. His hand clamped around her wrist with bruising force, and the knife tumbled from her grip to land in the dirt beside the spilled water bucket. "Let go of me!" Clara twisted and fought, bringing her free hand up to claw at his face. Her nails raked across his cheek, leaving angry red welts, and he snarled in pain and fury. His other hand came up to grab her shoulder, and they struggled there in the clearing with the mountains watching silently all around them. "You are coming with me!" the drifter hissed, trying to drag her toward his horse, a mangy-looking bay gelding tied to a pine tree at the edge of the clearing. "There are men down in the territories who pay good money for pretty white women. The Comancheros are not particular about where their merchandise comes from." Terror flooded through Clara's veins like ice water. She had heard stories about the Comancheros, the lawless traders who operated along the borders, dealing in stolen goods, weapons, and human lives. Women and children disappeared along the frontier all the time, vanishing into a nightmare of captivity and abuse that most never returned from. She fought harder, driving her knee toward his groin, but he twisted away and backhanded her across the face with enough force to make her ears ring and stars explode across her vision. Clara tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek, and her legs buckled beneath her. The drifter's grip was the only thing keeping her upright as he hauled her across the clearing toward his horse. "That's enough of that," he growled. "Make this easy on yourself, girl. You fight me, and I will make sure you regret it." Clara's mind raced, even as her body struggled to recover from the blow. She could not let him get her on that horse. Once they left this clearing, once they started down the mountain trails, her chances of escape would shrink to nothing. She needed help, needed someone to hear her, but the nearest neighbor was miles away, and Colton was somewhere in the high country with no way of knowing she was in danger. She opened her mouth to scream again, hoping against hope that someone might hear, but the drifter clamped his hand over her mouth, cutting off the sound before it could fully form. His fingers pressed hard against her lips, and she could smell the unwashed stench of him, sweat and dirt and something darker. "None of that," he said. "We're going to take a nice quiet ride down the mountain, and you are going to behave yourself. Understand?" Clara did not understand. She would never understand men who thought they could take whatever they wanted, who saw women as property to be bought and sold. But she nodded anyway, letting her body go limp in his grip, pretending to surrender even as her mind continued searching for a way out. The drifter seemed satisfied with her compliance. He relaxed his grip slightly, turning to lead her toward the horse, and that was when Clara made her move. She stomped down hard on his instep with the heel of her boot, feeling bone crunch beneath the leather, and when he released her with a howl of pain, she ran. She did not head for the trees as she had planned. Instead, she ran toward the cabin, toward the rifle waiting inside. If she could just reach it, if she could get her hands on that weapon, she would have a chance. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold the rifle steady, and she had spent years hunting game in these mountains. She knew she could hit what she aimed at, but the drifter was injured, not incapacitated. He caught her halfway across the clearing, tackling her from behind and sending them both crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and fury. Clara's chin hit the dirt hard enough to rattle her teeth, and the weight of him on her back drove the air from her lungs in a painful whoosh. "You little wildcat," he panted, pressing her face into the dirt. "I was going to deliver you in good condition, but now I think I will take my payment in advance." His hand fumbled with her skirts, and Clara bucked beneath him like an unbroken horse, screaming and clawing at the ground. Her fingers found a rock, a smooth river stone probably carried up from the creek by her father years ago, and she gripped it tightly before swinging her arm back blindly. The stone connected with something solid, and the drifter cursed and loosened his hold just enough for Clara to twist onto her back. They were face to face now, his weight still pinning her to the ground, his eyes full of a rage that promised pain and worse. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow where the stone had struck, and his hand rose to strike her again. Clara braced herself for the blow, knowing it would likely knock her unconscious, knowing that would be the end of everything she was fighting for. The blow never landed. Instead, the drifter was suddenly yanked backward with such force that he seemed to fly through the air, lifted clean off Clara's body and thrown several feet away like a child's toy. Clara scrambled backward on her hands and heels, gasping for breath, trying to understand what had just happened. And then she saw him. Colton Mackenzie stood between her and the drifter, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle and barely contained fury. His shoulders were so broad they seemed to block out the sun, and his arms, exposed by rolled-up sleeves, were corded with the kind of strength that came from years of hard mountain living. His hair, dark brown and hanging past his shoulders, was tied back with a leather cord, and his jaw, covered in several days' worth of beard, was clenched so tightly Clara could see the muscle jumping beneath his tanned skin. "Get up," Colton said, his voice low and deadly calm. He was speaking to the drifter, who was still sprawling in the dirt where he had landed. "Get up so I can put you back down." The drifter scrambled to his feet, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver at his hip. But Colton was faster. His own weapon, a massive Colt Peacemaker that looked almost small in his large hand, was already drawn and aimed at the center of the drifter's chest. "I would not," Colton said. "I can put a bullet through your heart before your fingers touch leather, and we both know it." The drifter froze, his hand hovering near his weapon, his eyes calculating odds he did not like. "This is between me and the woman," he tried. "No call for you to get involved." "That woman is under my protection," Colton said, taking a step forward. Each movement was controlled, deliberate, like a mountain lion stalking prey. You put your hands on her. You tried to take her. Now you are going to pay for that mistake." Clara pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking but her spirit unbroken. She wanted to run to Colton, to throw herself into the safety of his arms, but she knew better than to distract him when he was focused on a threat. Instead, she stayed where she was, watching the confrontation unfold. "I did not know she belonged to anyone," the drifter said, trying a different approach. "She was alone. I thought she was fair game. No harm meant, friend." "I am not your friend," Colton said flatly, "and she does not belong to me. She belongs to herself. But I made a promise to protect her, and that is exactly what I intend to do." The drifter's eyes darted between Colton and his horse, clearly weighing his chances of making a run for it. "Look, I am leaving. Just let me get on my horse and ride out of here. You will never see me again." "You are right about that," Colton agreed. "But you are not riding out. You are going to turn around and start walking down the mountain. If you come back this way, if I ever see your face again, I will not be showing you mercy like I am right now. I will put you in the ground where you belong. Do you understand me?" The drifter nodded quickly, too quickly, and Clara saw the shift in his eyes a second before he made his move. His hand dropped to his revolver in a desperate draw, and the clearing exploded with the thunder of gunfire. Colton's shot came first, as he had promised it would. The bullet struck the drifter's revolver just as it cleared the holster, sending the weapon spinning away into the underbrush. The drifter yelped and clutched his hand, which bore a shallow graze from where the bullet had ricocheted off the metal of his gun. Before the drifter could recover, Colton closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and drove his fist into the man's jaw with the force of a sledgehammer striking stone. The drifter's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hit the dirt. Colton stood over the fallen man for a long moment, breathing hard, his fists still clenched. Then he seemed to shake himself, and he turned to look at Clara, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was completely different now, gentle and concerned instead of cold and dangerous. "Clara, are you hurt?" Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. Now that the danger had passed, now that Colton was here, the full weight of what had almost happened crashed over her like a wave. Her knees buckled, and Colton was there in an instant, catching her before she could fall, gathering her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you," he murmured, holding her against his broad chest. "You are safe now. I have got you." Clara buried her face against his shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and leather and wood smoke that always clung to him. Her hands fisted in the fabric, holding on as if he might disappear if she let go. She did not cry, had learned long ago that tears solved nothing in the harsh mountain wilderness, but she trembled with the release of fear and adrenaline. "He was going to take me," she whispered. "He said there were men who would pay for me. Comancheros." Colton's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press his face into her hair. "That will never happen," he said fiercely. "Do you hear me, Clara? I will never let anyone take you. Never." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the clearing while the unconscious drifter lay forgotten in the dirt and the afternoon sun continued its slow journey across the sky. Clara felt her heartbeat gradually slow, felt the strength returning to her limbs, but she was in no hurry to step out of Colton's embrace. This was where she felt safest, where she had felt safest since the day he had first arrived at her father's cabin 4 years ago. Colton had been 24 then, Clara just 18, and he had come down from the high country looking to trade furs for supplies. Her father, William Jenkins, had been one of the few men Colton trusted, and over the years the young trapper had become a frequent visitor to their cabin. He had taught Clara how to read the signs that warned of approaching storms, how to track elk through deep snow, how to survive alone if she ever had to. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite meaning for it to happen, friendship had deepened into something more powerful, something neither of them had dared to name out loud. When her father had died in February, Colton had been the one to help her bury him in the frozen ground behind the cabin. He had been the one to promise he would watch over her, keep her safe in the isolated mountain home she refused to leave. And he had been the one whose departure 2 weeks ago had left a hollow ache in her chest that had nothing to do with loneliness and everything to do with the quiet, unspoken love that had been growing between them. Finally, Colton pulled back just enough to look down at her face. His hand came up to gently touch the bruise that was already forming on her cheekbone where the drifter had struck her, and his jaw clenched again. "He hit you." "I'm all right," Clara said, even though the side of her face throbbed with pain. "You came back in time. That is all that matters." "I came back almost too late," Colton said roughly. "I was on the ridge above the cabin when I heard you scream. If I had been even 5 minutes later—" He broke off, unable to finish the sentence. "But you were not," Clara said firmly. She reached up to touch his face, her palm resting against his bearded cheek. "You were here when I needed you. You saved me, Colton." Something shifted in his eyes, some decision being made, and then he was lowering his head to press his forehead against hers. They breathed the same air, shared the same space, and Clara felt the last of her fear dissolve in the warmth of his presence. "I cannot keep leaving you alone," Colton said quietly. "This place is too isolated, too dangerous. If something happened to you while I was gone, I would never forgive myself." "Then do not leave," Clara whispered. "Stay with me." Colton's eyes searched hers. "Clara, do you know what you are saying?" She did know. She was saying that she wanted him to stay not just for a few days or weeks, but permanently. She was saying that she was tired of pretending her feelings for him were purely practical, born only of necessity and convenience. She was saying that when he left on his trapping expeditions, a part of her left with him, and she was not whole again until he returned. "I know exactly what I'm saying," she told him. "I'm saying that I do not want to watch you ride away anymore. I'm saying that this cabin is too quiet without you. I'm saying that Clara." Her name on his lips was both a question and an answer, and when he kissed her, gentle and careful as if she might break, Clara felt something inside her chest crack open and flood with warmth. This was what she'd been waiting for, what she'd been too afraid to hope for. This was coming home to a place that had nothing to do with walls and roofs and everything to do with the man whose arms held her as if she were something precious and irreplaceable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers again. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for longer than I can remember, Clara Jenkins. I just did not know if you felt the same way." Clara laughed, the sound surprising her with its brightness after the darkness of the last hour. "How could you not know? Every time you leave, I count the days until you come back. Every time you are here, I find excuses to be near you. I've been in love with you for 2 years at least, probably longer." 2 years, Colton repeated, shaking his head in wonder. "We have wasted so much time." "Then let us not waste any more," Clara said. She kissed him again, pouring into it all the fear and relief and love she'd been holding back for so long. Colton responded with an intensity that stole her breath, his large hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness, his thumbs stroking her cheeks as if memorizing the feel of her skin. They might have stayed like that indefinitely if a groan from the unconscious drifter had not reminded them they were not alone. Colton broke the kiss reluctantly and turned to look at the man on the ground, his expression hardening once more. "What should we do with him?" Clara asked. Colton considered for a moment. "He is not worth the bullet it would take to kill him, much as I would like to. I will tie him up, put him on his horse, and take him down to the territorial marshal in Las Vegas. Let the law deal with him." "That is 3 days' ride from here," Clara protested. "I do not want you to leave again so soon." "I will not be gone long," Colton promised. "And when I come back, we are going to have a serious talk about the future. About our future." The way he said it made Clara's heart skip a beat. "What kind of talk?" Colton smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. "The kind that involves making promises, the kind that involves you maybe agreeing to change your last name to Mackenzie, if you are willing." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time since the attack, but these were good tears, happy tears. "I might be willing," she said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. "I suppose I could be persuaded." "Just persuaded?" Colton pulled her close again, dropping a kiss on top of her head. "I guess I will have to work harder than that." "I guess you will," Clara agreed, but she was already nodding, already saying yes to the unasked question that hung between them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Colton made short work of securing the drifter, binding his hands and feet with rope from the man's own saddlebags and hoisting him over the back of his horse like a sack of grain. The drifter was starting to wake up, groaning and cursing, but one look at Colton's face silenced him quickly. Colton retrieved the man's damaged revolver from where it had landed in the bushes and tucked it into his own belt, along with a wicked-looking knife he found hidden in the drifter's boot. "There's a whole arsenal here," Colton muttered, pulling out a smaller pistol, brass knuckles, and a length of chain that made Clara shudder to think about its intended purpose. This man was prepared for trouble. "He found more than he bargained for," Clara said with satisfaction. Colton looked at her, and despite the seriousness of the situation, there was pride in his eyes. "You fought hard. Your father taught you well. You should be proud of yourself, Clara." "I am just glad you came home when you did," Clara said honestly. "I do not know if I could have held him off much longer." "You will never have to find out," Colton said. He finished securing the drifter and turned back to Clara. "I need to take him down the mountain while there is still daylight, but I will be back as soon as I can. 5 days, 6 at most." 6 days, Clara repeated, hating the thought of it but understanding the necessity. The drifter needed to be brought to justice, and Colton was right that he was not worth killing in cold blood. Besides, Clara wanted him to face the law, wanted him to be punished properly for what he had tried to do. "You could come with me," Colton suggested, but Clara shook her head. "Someone needs to stay here and watch the place," she said. "And besides, I'm not going to let some drifter chase me out of my own home." Colton looked like he wanted to argue, but he seemed to recognize the stubborn set of her jaw. Instead, he went to his own horse, a magnificent buckskin stallion named Ranger, and unpacked a rifle from his gear. "Take this," he said, handing her the weapon. "It is a Winchester repeater, newer than your father's old rifle. 15 rounds without reloading. If anyone else shows up while I am gone, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand?" Clara took the rifle, feeling the weight of it, the promise of protection it represented. "I understand. And keep the door locked. Do not go down to the creek alone. Stay alert." Colton was giving her instructions now, his mind already on the journey ahead and the dangers that might still be lurking in the mountains. "If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you fire 3 shots into the air. I will hear them, and I will come back." "I will be fine," Clara assured him, though part of her already ached at the thought of him leaving. "You do what you need to do. I will be here when you get back." Colton pulled her into one more embrace, this one fierce and possessive, as if he were trying to memorize the feel of her in his arms. "When I come back, we are going to talk about building a bigger cabin," he said into her hair. "One with a real bedroom and a larger kitchen, maybe even a room for—" He paused, suddenly seeming uncertain. "For children?" Clara finished softly, and she felt him nod against her hair. "Is that something you would want?" he asked. "A family? With me?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "I want that very much." She felt Colton's chest rise and fall with a deep breath, as if he had been holding it while waiting for her answer. "Good," he said simply. "That is good." They stood together for another long moment before Colton finally, reluctantly, pulled away. He mounted Ranger in one smooth motion, taking the reins of the drifter's horse in his other hand. The prisoner was fully conscious now, glaring at them both with hatred in his eyes, but he had the sense to keep his mouth shut. 6 days, Colton said again, looking down at Clara from his height on the horse. "Wait for me." "Always," Clara promised, and she stood watching as he rode out of the clearing, leading the drifter's horse behind him. She watched until they disappeared down the trail that wound through the pine trees, watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the whisper of wind through the branches. Then she picked up her fallen bucket, retrieved her hunting knife from where it had fallen in the dirt, and went inside her cabin to bolt the door behind her. The next 6 days passed with agonizing slowness. Clara kept herself busy with the countless tasks that mountain living required, tending her small garden, checking her snares for rabbits, preserving meat, mending clothes, chopping firewood. But no matter how occupied her hands were, her mind kept drifting to Colton, wondering where he was, if he had made it safely to Las Vegas, if he was already on his way back. She thought about what he had said about building a bigger cabin, about children, about a future together. The idea filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun beating down on the high country. She had been alone for so long, first just with her father after her mother died of fever when Clara was 12, and then completely alone after her father's death. The thought of having a partner, a true companion, someone to build a life with, it was almost too wonderful to believe. On the fourth night, Clara sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the stars emerge one by one against the darkening sky. The mountains around her were quiet except for the usual night sounds: the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of some small creature moving through the underbrush. She held the Winchester rifle across her lap, her father's old revolver tucked into her belt, feeling more prepared than she had when the drifter had surprised her. She thought about that moment often, replaying it in her mind, thinking about what she could have done differently. She should have been more careful, should have kept the cabin door locked even in daylight, should have carried a weapon with her at all times. But she had grown complacent in the relative safety of the isolated mountains, had forgotten that danger could come from anywhere. She would not forget again. On the morning of the sixth day, Clara was drawing water from the creek, the Winchester slung across her back, when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Her heart leaped into her throat, and her hand went automatically to the rifle, but then she recognized the distinctive rhythm of Ranger's gait, and relief flooded through her so powerfully it made her knees weak. Colton emerged from the tree line, and Clara set down her bucket and ran to meet him. He dismounted before Ranger had fully stopped and caught her as she threw herself into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as if she weighed nothing. "You are back," Clara said unnecessarily, laughing and crying at the same time. "You are really back." "I told you I would be," Colton said, setting her down but not letting her go. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and trail dust covering his clothes, but his smile was genuine and warm. "Did you think I would not come back to you?" "I did not doubt," Clara said, "but I missed you anyway." "I missed you too," Colton admitted. "The whole ride there and back, all I could think about was getting home to you. That marshal asked me 20 questions about the drifter, and I barely heard half of them because my mind was here." "What happened to him?" Clara asked. "The drifter?" "He is in jail awaiting trial," Colton said with satisfaction. "Turns out there was already a warrant out for him in Texas: cattle theft, robbery, assault. He's going to prison for a long time, Clara. He will never bother you again." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "He deserves whatever he gets." Colton cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, as his eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have been thinking the whole ride back," he said, "about what I want to say to you, how I want to say it, and I realize that I am not good with fancy words. I'm just a mountain man who knows more about trapping beaver than courting women, but I know what I feel, and I know what I want." "What do you want?" Clara whispered, even though she thought she already knew the answer. "I want you to marry me," Colton said simply. "Not someday, not eventually, soon. As soon as we can get down to a town with a preacher. I want you to be my wife, Clara. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build that bigger cabin with you, fill it with children and laughter and love. I want to spend every day making sure you know how precious you are to me." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide, her face hurt. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. Yes to everything." Colton let out a breath that sounded suspiciously shaky, and then he was kissing her with a passion that made the world spin around them. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, holding him close as if she could fuse them together through sheer force of will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers in the gesture that was becoming familiar, intimate, theirs. "I did not bring you a ring," he said apologetically. "I should have, but I did not think about it until I was already on my way back." "I do not need a ring," Clara said honestly. "I just need you." But Colton was already reaching into his pocket, pulling out something wrapped in a scrap of cloth. "I did not buy you a ring," he clarified, "but I did make you something." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a band carved from bone, probably elk or deer, polished smooth and etched with an intricate pattern of mountains and pine trees. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly made by skilled hands during long evening hours around a campfire. I started working on this 2 years ago," Colton admitted, his ears turning slightly red. "When I first realized I was in love with you. I kept telling myself it was foolish, that you would never want a rough man like me, but I could not help myself. I had to make something, had to have something ready just in case. Clara took the ring with shaking hands, marveling at the craftsmanship, the care that had gone into every detail. "It is perfect," she said. "It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." Colton took it back gently and then took her left hand in his much larger one. "Clara Jenkins," he said formally, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Clara said again, watching as he slid the bone ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, which she supposed it had. "Yes, Colton Mackenzie, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, softer this time, sweeter, full of the hope and joy of a future stretching out before them like an unexplored trail. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was climbing higher in the sky, and Clara realized they had been standing by the creek for quite some time. "Come inside," she said, taking his hand. "You must be exhausted. When was the last time you slept?" "2 nights ago," Colton admitted. "I wanted to get back to you. Sleep seemed less important." Clara shook her head at his stubbornness, but led him toward the cabin anyway, Ranger following behind them like a faithful dog. Inside, the space seemed smaller with Colton's large frame filling it, but Clara had never felt more content. This was how it should be, she thought. This was what home was supposed to feel like. She made him sit down while she prepared food, heating up stew left over from her dinner the night before, and slicing thick pieces of bread she had baked that morning. Colton ate with the appetite of a man who had been living on jerky and hardtack for days, and Clara felt a warm satisfaction at being able to take care of him the way he had taken care of her. "Tell me about Las Vegas," she said as they ate. "What was it like?" "Busy," Colton said. "Too many people, too much noise, I could barely stand it. The marshal was decent enough, though. He said to thank you for capturing such a wanted criminal. There is a reward, actually. $50 from the territorial government." Clara's eyes widened. $50? That's a fortune. "We will use it to buy supplies for the new cabin," Colton said, "and maybe some nice things for you. Fabric for dresses, maybe. Whatever you want." "I want lumber and nails and a good cook stove," Clara said practically. "Everything else I can make or do without." Colton smiled at her, that rare, wonderful smile that lit up his whole face. "You are remarkable. Do you know that? Most women would want jewelry or fancy things." "I'm not most women," Clara pointed out. "I grew up in these mountains. I know what is important." "You certainly are not most women." "Grr," Colton agreed. "You are extraordinary. And you are mine." The possessiveness in his voice should probably have bothered her, but it did not. Instead, it made her feel warm and wanted and protected. "And you are mine," she countered. "Do not forget that." "Never," Colton promised. "I am yours for as long as you want me." "Forever, then," Clara said. "I want you forever." After they finished eating, Clara insisted that Colton rest while she took care of Ranger, brushing down the horse and making sure he had food and water. The buckskin stallion was well-trained and patient, standing still for her ministrations, even though she was not his master. She found herself talking to the horse as she worked, telling him about her plans for the future, about the life she and Colton were going to build together. When she came back inside, she found Colton fast asleep on her bed, still fully dressed, his long legs hanging off the end of the mattress that was too short for his tall frame. Clara smiled and carefully removed his boots, then covered him with a blanket even though the cabin was warm. He did not stir, lost in the deep sleep of complete exhaustion. Clara settled into the rocking chair her father had made years ago and picked up her mending, content to sit and watch Colton sleep. She studied his face, memorizing every detail, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose from where it had been broken years ago, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was not a conventionally handsome man, his features too rough-hewn and weathered by mountain life for that. But to Clara, he was perfect. She thought about how different her life would have been if Colton had never walked into it. After her father died, she had been preparing to accept a lonely existence, assuming she would live out her days alone in the mountains with only her memories for company. The thought of leaving, of going down to one of the settlements and trying to make a life among strangers, had filled her with dread. The mountains were her home, the only home she had ever known, and she had not been willing to abandon them even if it meant a solitary future. But now everything had changed. Now she had Colton, and the lonely future she had been dreading had transformed into something bright and full of possibility. They would build a life together, here in the high country, raising children who would learn to love the mountains as much as their parents did. It would not be an easy life, mountain living never was, but it would be a good life, a full life, a life worth living. Colton slept through the afternoon and into the evening. Clara prepared dinner, the smell of roasting venison and wild onions filling the cabin, and finally, he stirred. She watched as he blinked awake, momentarily confused about where he was before his eyes found her, and his expression softened. "How long was I asleep?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "About 6 hours," Clara said, bringing him a cup of water. "You needed it." Colton sat up, scrubbing his hands over his face. "I did not mean to sleep so long. I wanted to spend time with you." "We have all the time in the world now," Clara reminded him. "You are not leaving again, remember?" "Never," Colton agreed. He stood and stretched, his shirt pulling tight across his broad shoulders and muscled chest. Clara found herself staring and quickly looked away, feeling her cheeks heat. Colton noticed and grinned, clearly pleased by her reaction. He crossed the cabin in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "You are blushing," he observed, sounding delighted. "I am not," Clara protested, even though she knew it was a lie. "It is just warm in here from the stove." "If you say so," Colton said, not believing her for a second. He bent his head to kiss her neck, just below her ear, and Clara shivered despite the warmth of the cabin. "You know we are engaged now. You are allowed to look at me." "I know that," Clara said, trying to maintain some dignity, even as her knees went weak from the feel of his lips on her skin. "I look at you all the time." "Not like that, you do not," Colton murmured against her neck. "Not like you want to—" "Dinner is ready," Clara interrupted, pulling away before she completely lost her composure. "You should eat while it is still hot." Colton let her go with obvious reluctance, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. They ate together, talking about practical things like when they would go down to get married and what supplies they would need for building the new cabin. Colton thought they could be ready to start construction by late summer if they worked hard, and they could have the basic structure completed before the first snow fell in October. "We can spend the winter finishing the inside," he said, "making furniture, adding touches to make it feel like home, and then by spring." He paused, looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Well, by spring, maybe we will need that extra room we talked about." Clara felt her cheeks heat again, but she did not look away. "Maybe we will," she agreed softly. After dinner, they sat outside on the porch, watching the stars emerge against the darkening sky. Colton's arm was around Clara's shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling more content than she could ever remember being. The mountains rose around them, dark silhouettes against the twilight, familiar and eternal. "I want to go to Glen Rio to get married," Clara said after a while. "It is not too far, and I have heard they have a proper church there now with a real preacher." "Glen Rio it is," Colton agreed. "We can leave in a few days once we have prepared for the journey. It will take us about a week to get there, maybe less if the weather holds." "A week," Clara repeated, trying to imagine it. She had not been that far from the cabin in years, had not seen a real town since her father had taken her to Santa Fe when she was 16. The thought was both exciting and slightly terrifying. Colton seemed to sense her apprehension. "We will go together," he reminded her. "You will not be alone. And after we are married, we will come straight back here. This is home. That will never change." "I know," Clara said, relaxing against him again. "As long as I am with you, I am home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, until the night had fully fallen and the air had taken on the characteristic chill of high altitude. Finally, Colton stirred. "We should go inside," he said reluctantly. "It is getting cold." Inside the cabin, they faced the reality of their situation for the first time. There was only one bed, and while they were engaged to be married, they were not married yet. Clara felt suddenly awkward, unsure of the proper protocol. Her father had never discussed such things with her, and her mother had died before Clara was old enough to need such instruction. Colton seemed to read her mind. "I will sleep on the floor," he said immediately. "It is not a problem. I have slept in worse places." "You will do no such thing," Clara protested. "You need proper rest. Take the bed. I will sleep in the rocking chair." "Clara—" "Or," she interrupted, gathering her courage, We could share the bed. We are engaged. We will be married in less than 2 weeks. And I trust you." Colton looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable in his expression. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Clara said firmly. "We are adults, and we are committed to each other. I see no reason to be uncomfortable when we do not have to be." So they shared the bed that night, Clara curled against Colton's side with her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His arm was wrapped around her, holding her close but not presuming anything more. It was innocent and yet intimate, comfortable in a way that spoke of long familiarity and deep trust. "This is nice," Clara murmured sleepily. "I could get used to this." She felt Colton's chest rumble with quiet laughter. "You had better get used to it," he said, "because once we are married, I'm never letting you out of my arms." "That might make daily chores difficult," Clara pointed out, but she was smiling. "We will figure it out," Colton said confidently, and Clara found herself believing him. They would figure everything out together. That was what partners did. Over the next few days, they prepared for the journey to Glen Rio. Colton hunted and brought down a buck, and they spent an entire day smoking the meat so it would keep during their travels. Clara packed her few nice dresses, including the green one her mother had made her years ago, which she had been saving for a special occasion. She could not think of any occasion more special than her wedding. They also began planning the new cabin in earnest. Colton paced out the dimensions in the clearing, marking corners with stones, showing Clara where he envisioned the rooms would be. It would be twice the size of her current cabin, with a real bedroom separate from the main living area, a larger kitchen, and yes, a smaller room that could serve as a nursery when the time came. "We will need to cut a lot of timber," Colton said, surveying the forest around them. "But there is good wood here. Pine and aspen mostly, with some Douglas fir on the higher slopes. We can start felling trees as soon as we get back from Glen Rio." "How long will it take to build?" Clara asked. "If we work hard, we can have the frame up in a month," Colton estimated. "Then another month for the roof and walls. After that, it is just a matter of finishing the inside, which we can do over the winter when outdoor work is impossible anyway." Clara tried to imagine it. A new cabin, built by their own hands, a true home for the family they would create together. The thought filled her with excitement and determination. She was not afraid of hard work, never had been. Growing up in the mountains had taught her that anything worth having was worth working for. On the morning they were set to leave for Glen Rio, Clara stood in the doorway of her father's cabin and took one last look around. This place held so many memories, both happy and sad. Her childhood was here, her mother's laughter, her father's gentle wisdom. But it was time to move forward, time to create new memories in a new home with the man she loved. "Are you all right?" Colton asked, coming to stand behind her. His large hands settled on her shoulders, warm and comforting. "I am fine," Clara said, and she meant it. "I was just saying goodbye. Not to this place I will always come back here, but to the past, I suppose, to the girl I used to be." "That girl was pretty remarkable," Colton said quietly, "but the woman you have become is extraordinary." Clara turned in his arms to smile up at him. "You are good for my vanity, you know that?" "I'm just telling the truth," Colton said. "Now come on. We have a long ride ahead of us, and I want to make it to the lower valleys before nightfall." They set out with the sun barely over the mountains, Colton on Ranger and Clara on her own horse, a gray mare named Willow that had belonged to her father. They traveled light, carrying only what they needed for the journey and a little extra for trading in Glen Rio. The trail wound down through forests of pine and aspen, following ridgelines and crossing mountain streams that ran cold and clear with snowmelt from the higher peaks. Clara had forgotten how beautiful the journey could be. Living in one place for so long, she had grown accustomed to the view from her clearing, wonderful as it was. But riding through the mountains revealed new vistas at every turn. Meadows filled with wildflowers, stands of aspen that would turn gold in the fall, rocky outcroppings that offered views for miles in every direction. They camped that first night beside a small lake, the water so still it perfectly reflected the stars overhead. Colton caught trout for their dinner, cooking them over an open fire while Clara made biscuits in her small traveling pan. They ate in comfortable silence, tired from the long day of riding, but content in each other's company. "Tell me about your family," Clara said as they sat by the fire afterward. "You have never talked much about where you came from." Colton stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "There is not much to tell," he said finally. "My father was a trapper, like me. He taught me everything I know about living in the mountains. My mother died when I was young. Fever took her. And my father, he disappeared when I was 17. Went out on a trapping expedition and never came back. I searched for months but never found any trace of him." "I am sorry," Clara said softly, understanding the pain of losing parents all too well. "It was a long time ago," Colton said. "After that, I just kept doing what he had taught me. Trapping, trading, surviving. I never thought much about settling down or having a family of my own. It seemed like asking for heartache, knowing how easily you could lose the people you love out here." "But you changed your mind," Clara said. Colton looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "You changed my mind," he corrected. "Meeting you, getting to know you, it made me realize that being alone was worse than the risk of losing someone. At least if you love people, if you let yourself care, you have something worth living for." Clara moved closer to him, tucking herself against his side. "I am glad you gave me a chance," she said. "I am glad you did not let fear keep you away." "Me too," Colton said, wrapping his arm around her. "Me too." They traveled for 5 more days, making good time on the well-worn trails that connected the high country to the settlements below. The landscape gradually changed as they descended, the pine forests giving way to pinon and juniper, the air growing warmer and drier. They passed through a few small settlements, places where a handful of families had carved out an existence on the edge of the wilderness, and everyone they met was friendly, offering hospitality and good wishes when they learned of the couple's plans to marry. On the evening of the 6th day, they crested a rise and saw Glen Rio spread out in the valley below. It was not a large town, perhaps 24 buildings clustered along a single main street, but to Clara, who had not seen any settlement in years, it looked vast and bustling. She could see a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and yes, a white church with a steeple rising above the other buildings. "There it is," Colton said, sounding as nervous as Clara felt. "Our destination." They rode into town as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. People stopped to stare at the strangers, especially at Colton with his impressive size and mountain man appearance, but no one seemed unfriendly. They found a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Peterson, who clucked over them like a mother hen when she learned they were there to be married. "Oh, how wonderful!" she exclaimed, her round face beaming. "We do not get many weddings here. You must stay with me, and I will help you prepare. When is the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Colton said. "Tomorrow, if the preacher is available." "I am sure he will be," Mrs. Peterson said. "Reverend Matthews is always happy to perform weddings. Let me get you settled in your rooms, and then I will send word to him." She emphasized the word rooms, plural, and Clara appreciated the woman's discretion. Mrs. Peterson showed them to 2 small but clean rooms on the 2nd floor of the boarding house, with a shared parlor between them. It was more space than Clara had lived in for years, and she found it slightly overwhelming. After they had washed up from the journey and changed into cleaner clothes, Reverend Matthews arrived. He was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he listened carefully as Colton explained their situation, that they lived in the mountains, far from any town, and wanted to be married as quickly as possible so they could return home before the weather changed. "I understand completely," the Reverend said. "Mountain folk have their own rhythms, their own needs. I'm happy to perform the ceremony tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. Will you have witnesses?" "We do not know anyone here," Clara admitted. "That is no problem at all," Reverend Matthews assured her. "Mrs. Peterson can stand up with you, and I am sure we can find someone in town to witness for Mr. Mackenzie. These things have a way of working themselves out." And so it was settled. Clara and Colton would be married the following afternoon in the little white church. After the Reverend left, they sat together in the parlor between their rooms, holding hands and marveling at how quickly their lives were changing. "By this time tomorrow, you will be my wife," Colton said, wonder in his voice. "And you will be my husband," Clara replied. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Colton admitted with a laugh, "but in a good way, are you?" "Yes," Clara said, "but also excited. This feels right, Colton. Us together. It feels like what is supposed to happen." "It does," Colton agreed. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed the bone ring on her finger. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be an important day." Clara slept fitfully that night, her mind too full of anticipation to truly relax. She kept touching the ring on her finger, reassuring herself that this was real, that tomorrow she would marry the man she loved. When morning finally came, she was almost relieved. Mrs. Peterson descended upon her after breakfast, insisting on helping Clara prepare for the wedding. The older woman had produced a beautiful bouquet of wildflowers from somewhere, and she helped Clara arrange her hair in an elaborate style that made her look older, more sophisticated than her usual simple braid. "You look absolutely lovely," Mrs. Peterson declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Clara was wearing her mother's green dress, which fit her perfectly, and with her hair styled and her cheeks flushed with excitement, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The ceremony was held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with the church doors open to let in the warm summer breeze. True to his word, Reverend Matthews had found a witness for Colton, the town blacksmith, a burly man named Tom, who seemed delighted to be part of the occasion. A handful of townspeople had also gathered, word having spread that there was to be a wedding, and they filled the first few pews with friendly, curious faces. Clara stood at the back of the church, her heart pounding, as she waited for the ceremony to begin. Then Colton appeared at the front of the church, standing beside the reverend, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. He had cleaned up, trimmed his beard, and pulled his long hair back neatly. He was wearing what were clearly his best clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a leather vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. But it was the expression on his face as he looked at her that made Clara's eyes fill with tears. He looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if he could not quite believe his good fortune. Mrs. Peterson squeezed her arm gently. "Go on, dear," she whispered. "He's waiting for you." Clara walked down the short aisle, her eyes never leaving Colton's face. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and the touch steadied her, grounded her. This was real. This was happening. Reverend Matthews began speaking, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. He talked about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage, about the importance of standing together through whatever trials life might bring. Clara heard the words, understood them, but her attention was focused entirely on Colton, on the man who would soon be her husband. "Do you, Colton Mackenzie, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Colton said, his voice strong and certain, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. And do you, Clara Jenkins, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Clara said, her voice clear despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Mackenzie, you may kiss your bride." Colton cupped Clara's face gently in his large hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs, and then he kissed her. It was tender and sweet and full of promise, a kiss that spoke of all the tomorrows they would share, all the challenges they would face together, all the love they would build over a lifetime. When they finally broke apart, the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Clara laughed, feeling lighter than air, as Colton took her hand and led her back down the aisle and out into the warm afternoon sunlight. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he said, testing out her new name, "how does that sound?" "Perfect," Clara said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. "It sounds absolutely perfect." The townspeople had organized a small celebration in their honor, setting up tables in the street with food and drink. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Clara found herself swept up in it all, dancing with Colton and then with the friendly strangers who wanted to welcome the newlyweds. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and more social interaction than she had experienced in years, but she loved every moment of it. Finally, as the sun was setting and the party was winding down, Colton and Clara made their way back to the boarding house. And Peterson had moved Clara's belongings into Colton's room while they were at the church, and she gave them both a knowing smile as she handed Colton the key. "Congratulations to you both," she said warmly. "I wish you every happiness." Inside the room, with the door closed behind them and the noise of the celebration fading into the distance, Clara and Colton stood facing each other. Suddenly, despite everything they had shared, despite the weeks of growing intimacy, Clara felt nervous. Colton seemed to sense it. He took her hands gently. "We do not have to. I mean, if you are not ready, we can wait. We have all the time in the world." Clara shook her head. "I am ready," she said. I have never—" "Neither have I," Colton admitted, and Clara looked up at him in surprise. "I told you, I never thought about settling down before you. There was never anyone I wanted to be with like this." Somehow, knowing that they were both inexperienced made Clara feel better. They would figure this out together, just like they figured out everything else. She reached up to touch his face, running her fingers along the line of his jaw. "I love you," she said simply, "and I trust you. That is all we need." Colton smiled and bent to kiss her, and Clara let herself melt into him, into the warmth and safety and love he represented. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. They were partners now, bound together in the eyes of God and the law and their own hearts. That night, in the small room at the boarding house, Colton and Clara truly became husband and wife. It was tender and awkward and wonderful all at once, a joining that went beyond the physical to something deeper and more meaningful. And when Clara finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt complete in a way she had never felt before. They stayed in Glen Rio for 3 more days, enjoying the novelty of town life, but also eager to return to their mountain home. On the morning of their departure, they said goodbye to Mrs. Peterson and Reverend Matthews and the other friendly folks who had made them feel so welcome. The blacksmith, Tom, had a wedding gift for them, a set of sturdy iron hinges and latches for their new cabin. "You will need these when you start building," he said gruffly. "Consider it my contribution to your new life together." Touched by the kindness, Clara thanked him with tears in her eyes, and Colton shook his hand firmly. Then they mounted their horses and began the journey back to the mountains, back to the place they called home. The ride back seemed to go faster than the journey down had, perhaps because they were eager to return, to begin their new life together in earnest. They camped under the stars, cooked simple meals over open fires, and talked for hours about their plans for the future. Colton wanted to start cutting timber immediately, while the weather was still good. Clara wanted to expand her garden, plant more vegetables to see them through the long winter ahead. "We will need to lay in supplies before the first snow," Colton said. "Flour, sugar, salt, things we cannot make or grow ourselves. I can take some furs down to trade once we have enough saved up." "Or I could come with you," Clara suggested. "Now that I have been down to Glen Rio once, it does not seem quite so daunting, and I would not mind seeing Mrs. Peterson again." "We will go together then," Colton agreed. "I do not like the idea of leaving you alone at the cabin anymore, not after what happened with that drifter." "That reminds me," Clara said. "We need to talk about protection, not just guns, but maybe some kind of signal system, something so I can call for help if I need it when you are working on the cabin or hunting nearby." They discussed various options and eventually settled on a plan. Clara would carry a whistle that could be heard from a distance, and Colton would carry one as well. 3 sharp blasts would mean danger, and whoever heard it would come running immediately. It was simple but effective, and it made them both feel better. When they finally rode back into the clearing where the cabin stood, Clara felt a rush of relief and homecoming. This was where she belonged, here in these mountains with this man. Nothing else mattered. They immediately threw themselves into the work of building the new cabin. Colton was up before dawn each morning, selecting trees and felling them with precise, powerful strokes of his axe. Clara helped where she could, stripping bark and hauling smaller logs, but mostly she focused on maintaining their household and preparing for winter. She picked berries and preserved them, tended her garden vigilantly, and hunted small game with her rifle. The work was hard, exhausting even, but they were both happier than they had ever been. At night, they would collapse into bed together, too tired for much beyond holding each other. But that simple intimacy was enough. They were building something together, creating a future with their own hands, and every log that went into place was a testament to their commitment to each other. As summer faded into early fall, the frame of the new cabin began to take shape. It was larger than Clara had imagined, more solid, more permanent. Colton worked with the skill of someone who had learned carpentry from his father, fitting logs together with precision, making sure everything was level and true. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the old cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Colton placed his hand on Clara's stomach. "Do you think," he started, then paused. "Is it possible that you might be—" Clara covered his hand with her own, feeling a flutter of excitement and hope. Her monthly courses were late, though she had not said anything yet, not wanting to get either of their hopes up. "It is possible," she said carefully. "It is too soon to know for sure, but it is possible." Colton's face lit up with such joy that Clara felt her own eyes fill with tears. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We might be having a baby." "We might be," Clara agreed. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Colton admitted, "and excited and grateful. And Clara, if you are carrying my child, I will do everything in my power to make sure you are both safe and cared for. I promise you that." "I know you will," Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Colton." They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, both thinking about the possibility of a child, of their family growing, of the new cabin they were building being filled with the sounds of laughter and tiny footsteps. It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time in her life, Clara believed that beautiful dreams could come true. Over the next few weeks, it became increasingly clear that Clara was indeed pregnant. She experienced the telltale signs: morning sickness, fatigue, a sensitivity to certain smells. Colton became even more protective, insisting she rest more and work less, though Clara argued that she was perfectly capable of continuing her usual activities. "You are growing our child," Colton said stubbornly. "That is work enough. Let me take care of everything else." "That is not practical," Clara protested. "We have too much to do before winter sets in. I can help." They compromised. Clara continued to do lighter work around the homestead, while Colton took on the more strenuous tasks of finishing the cabin. By mid-October, the structure was complete. 4 solid walls, a sturdy roof, windows that actually opened and closed, and a door with Tom's iron hinges that swung smoothly on its frame. The interior still needed work, but the basic shelter was sound and weatherproof. Colton built a massive stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the coldest winter nights, and he installed the cook stove they had purchased in Glen Rio, using some of the reward money from capturing the drifter. "It is beautiful," Clara said, standing in the middle of what would be their new bedroom. The room was large enough for a proper bed, with space left over for a dresser and a rocking chair. "I cannot believe we actually built this." "You built it," Colton corrected, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her growing middle. "Your vision, your determination. I just provided the muscle." Clara laughed and leaned back against him. "I think we can both take credit," she said. "We are partners, remember?" "Partners," Colton agreed, pressing a kiss to her neck. "In everything." They moved into the new cabin in late October, just as the first snow began to dust the high peaks above them. It was a chaotic process, transferring all their belongings from the old cabin to the new one, but they worked together efficiently, and by the end of the day, they had everything sorted. That night, they christened their new home by making love in their new bedroom, in the bed that Colton had built with his own hands. It was different now that Clara was pregnant, her body changing in ways that still amazed and fascinated them both, but it was no less wonderful. If anything, the knowledge that they had created a life together made their intimacy even more meaningful. Winter settled over the mountains in earnest in November, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. But inside their new cabin, Colton and Clara were warm and comfortable. They spent the long winter evenings working on finishing touches for their home. Colton carved furniture, while Clara sewed curtains and made blankets. They talked endlessly about the future, about what they would name their baby, about how they would raise a child in the wilderness. "I want our children to know these mountains like we do," Clara said one evening as she worked on a tiny blanket for the baby. "I want them to understand how to read the weather, how to respect the wildlife, how to survive on their own if they need to." "They will learn," Colton assured her. "We will teach them everything we know, and they will grow up strong and capable just like their mother." As Clara's pregnancy progressed, Colton became increasingly nervous about the upcoming birth. They were miles from the nearest doctor, and while Clara's mother had told her stories about birthing babies, Clara herself had no practical experience. They discussed traveling down to Glen Rio before the baby came, but the passes were snowed in by December, and travel became impossible. "We will manage," Clara said, more confident than she felt. "Women have been having babies in remote places for thousands of years. We will figure it out." "I wish your mother were here," Colton said quietly. "Or my mother. Someone who could help you." "You will help me," Clara said firmly. "That is all I need." In February, a massive blizzard struck the mountains, burying their cabin under several feet of snow. They were trapped inside for days, living off their stored supplies, keeping the fire burning constantly. It was during this time that Clara went into labor. She woke in the middle of the night to a sharp pain in her lower back, and she knew immediately what was happening. "Colton," she said, shaking him awake, "it is time." Colton came instantly alert, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Clara said as another contraction hit, stronger this time. "The baby is coming." For the next several hours, Colton proved himself to be exactly what Clara needed, calm, supportive, and unshakable. He helped her through the contractions, reminding her to breathe, holding her hand when the pain became almost unbearable. He heated water and prepared clean cloths, remembering everything they had discussed during the long winter evenings. Just before dawn, as the blizzard finally began to quiet outside, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The baby announced his arrival with a lusty cry that filled the cabin, and Clara sobbed with relief and joy as Colton placed the tiny squirming bundle in her arms. "A son," Colton said, his voice rough with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his wife and newborn child. "We have a son, Clara." Clara looked down at the baby, at his tiny, perfect features and shock of dark hair, and fell instantly, completely in love. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Colton asked, gently touching the baby's impossibly small hand. Clara thought for a moment, remembering her father, remembering all the generations that had come before them. "William," she said, "after my father, William Mackenzie." "William," Colton repeated, testing the name. "I like it. William Mackenzie, welcome to the world, son." The baby, William, seemed to settle at the sound of his father's voice, his crying quieting to soft coos. Clara guided him to her breast, and he latched on naturally, nursing with the instinct all babies possessed. Colton watched them both with an expression of such profound love and wonder that it made Clara's heart ache. "You did so well," he told her, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her face. "You were so brave, so strong. I am in awe of you, Clara." "We did it together," Clara said, reaching for his hand. "All of this, everything we have built, we did it together." The blizzard finally cleared 2 days later, revealing a world transformed by snow. But inside the cabin, warmth and love and new life flourished. Clara recovered quickly from the birth, her mountain-bred strength serving her well, and Colton threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He was surprisingly good with the baby, his large, capable hands gentle and careful as he changed diapers and held his son. He would walk the floor with William for hours when the baby fussed, singing old trapping songs in his deep voice until the baby fell asleep. As winter gave way to spring and the snow began to melt, revealing the meadows and forests they loved, Clara and Colton emerged from their cabin with William bundled against the cool mountain air. They showed him the mountains that would be his home, the creeks where he would learn to fish, the trees he would learn to climb. "This is your world, little one," Clara told her son. "These mountains, this wilderness. You are going to grow up free and strong, and you are going to love this place as much as we do." William, only a few months old, could not understand his mother's words, but he seemed to respond to the love in her voice, his dark eyes so like his father's watching her face intently. As the years passed, the Mackenzie family flourished in their mountain home. William grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who could track rabbits before he was 5 and handle a fishing rod before he was 6. 2 years after William's birth, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, a beautiful girl with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's determined spirit. And 3 years after Catherine came, another son, James, who proved to be the most adventurous of all the children. The cabin that Colton and Clara had built together rang with laughter and life. They added onto it over the years, building a second floor to accommodate their growing family, expanding the kitchen, adding a workshop where Colton taught his sons the skills they would need to survive in the mountains. Clara taught all three children to read using the few books she had inherited from her parents, and she made sure they understood the history of the mountains and the people who had lived there before them. She taught Catherine the domestic skills she would need, while also making sure her daughter could hunt and trap just as well as her brothers. There would be no limiting beliefs in the Mackenzie household. Their children would be capable of anything they set their minds to. Colton remained the same solid, protective presence he had always been, though age and experience had softened some of his rough edges. His hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes deepened from years of squinting into the mountain sun. But Clara thought he had never been more handsome. They still took time for each other, carving out moments of intimacy even amid the chaos of raising three children in the wilderness. They would sit together on the porch after the children were asleep, holding hands and watching the stars, talking about everything and nothing, still as much in love as they had been on their wedding day. When William was 10, Catherine 8, and James 5, a group of settlers passed through their area, heading west to seek their fortunes in California. They stopped at the Mackenzie cabin to rest and resupply, and they marveled at what Colton and Clara had built. "How do you do it?" one of the women asked Clara as they sat together preparing dinner for the large group. "How do you manage out here with three children and no neighbors for miles?" Clara looked around at her cabin, at her children playing nearby under Colton's watchful eye, at the mountains rising majestically around them. "We do it together," she said simply. "My husband and I, we are partners in everything. And these mountains, they are not empty or lonely. They are full of life and beauty and everything we need." The woman looked skeptical, but Clara did not mind. She knew this life was not for everyone. Some people needed the security of towns and neighbors, the comfort of being surrounded by others. But for Clara and Colton, the mountains were where they belonged. This was home. That evening, after the settlers had moved on and the children were tucked into bed, Clara and Colton sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. She leaned against his shoulder, still fitting perfectly against his side after all these years, and sighed with contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Staying here, living this life? We could have gone to California with those settlers. We could have had an easier life." Colton wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "Not for 1 second," he said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. With you, with our children, in these mountains. Everything I have ever wanted is right here." "Even when winters are hard and the children are sick and we are running low on supplies," Clara pressed. "Even then," Colton confirmed. "Clara, the day I met you, my life changed. Before you, I was just surviving, just existing from one day to the next. But you gave me a reason to live, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. I would not trade any of it for all the gold in California." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, emotion welling up in her throat. Even after all these years, Colton could still move her with his words, still make her feel cherished and loved and valued. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you so much, Colton Mackenzie." "And I love you, Clara Mackenzie," he replied, turning to kiss her forehead. "I will love you until the day I die, and every day after that if God grants it." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one against the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept safely, warm and loved and secure. Around them, the mountains stood eternal, silent witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadows. Clara thought back to that terrifying day when the drifter had tried to steal her away, when her life had hung in the balance. She thought about Colton arriving just in time, his presence saving her from a fate too horrible to imagine. That moment had been the beginning of everything: their acknowledged love, their marriage, their family, their entire life together. But it had not just been Colton who saved her that day. She had fought for herself too, had refused to be a victim, had resisted with everything she had. And together, they had triumphed. Together, they had built something beautiful out of a moment of terror. That was the story of their life, Clara realized, taking challenges and turning them into opportunities, facing hardships and emerging stronger, working together to create something worth having. They were partners in every sense of the word, equal in their commitment to each other and to the life they had chosen. As the years continued to pass, the Mackenzie family became legendary in the surrounding territory. Stories were told about the mountain man and his wife, who had carved out a homestead in some of the most remote country in New Mexico, who had raised 3 capable, intelligent children in complete isolation from civilization. Travelers would sometimes make the difficult journey up to their cabin just to meet the family, to see for themselves what was possible when determination and love worked together. William grew into a man much like his father, tall, strong, capable, with the same protective instincts and deep love for the mountains. He eventually built his own cabin a few miles from his parents' homestead, married a girl from Glen Rio, and continued the family tradition of mountain living. Catherine surprised everyone by developing a talent for drawing and painting. She spent hours capturing the beauty of the mountains on canvas, using supplies her father traded for during his increasingly rare trips to town. Her artwork became sought after, and she eventually made a modest living selling paintings to wealthy collectors back east who wanted glimpses of the wild frontier. James, true to his adventurous nature, became a scout and guide, leading hunting parties and expeditions into the high country. He knew the mountains as well as his father, maybe better, and his services were always in demand. But he always came home to the cabin between expeditions, unable to stay away for long from the place where he had been raised. Colton and Clara aged gracefully, their bodies showing the wear of hard mountain living, but their spirits remaining strong. Colton's hair turned completely silver, and his movements became slightly slower, but he was still an imposing figure. Clara's face gained lines and her hands became rough from years of work, but her eyes remained bright and her smile still lit up every room she entered. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised Clara with a gift. He had spent months working on it in secret, carving and polishing and perfecting every detail. It was a small wooden box made from mountain mahogany, intricately carved with scenes from their life together, the cabin, the mountains, their children. On the lid he had carved their initials intertwined with a heart. "It is beautiful," Clara breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Colton, this must have taken you forever." 25 years, Colton said with a smile, give or take. I wanted to create something that would last, something that would remind you of everything we have built together. Clara opened the box to find the bone ring inside, the one Colton had given her when he proposed. She still wore it every day, but it had worn thin over the years, and she had been worried about losing it. Now it would have a safe place to rest when she was not wearing it. "Thank you," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. Even after 25 years, his kisses still made her heart race. "Thank you for everything. For loving me, for building this life with me, for being the best husband and father I could have ever hoped for." "Thank you for saying yes," Colton replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about being a husband. Thank you for teaching me what love really means." They celebrated their anniversary with a big family dinner. All 3 of their children and William's young family gathered around the large table Colton had built years ago. There was laughter and storytelling and so much love that Clara felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Clara and Colton sat once more on their porch, in the same spot where they had sat countless times before. Clara wore a shawl against the cool mountain evening, and Colton's arm was warm around her shoulders. "We did all right," Colton said quietly. "Did we not?" "We did better than all right," Clara corrected. "We built something amazing. A life, a family, a legacy. Our grandchildren will tell stories about us and their grandchildren after them. We created something that will last long after we are gone." "All because you screamed that day," Colton said with a small laugh. "All because I heard you and came running." "All because you came back just in time," Clara agreed. "You saved me, Colton, in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Colton said. "That is what partners do." Clara nodded, knowing he was right. They had saved each other, supported each other, lifted each other up through all the challenges and triumphs of the past 25 years, and they would continue doing so for however many years they had left. The mountains around them were dark silhouettes against a star-filled sky, eternal and unchanging. But within the cabin behind them, life continued to grow and flourish. Children and grandchildren, love and laughter, memories and traditions, all of it part of the legacy that Clara and Colton had created together. And as they sat there in the peaceful mountain night, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about her life. From the terrifying moment when a drifter had tried to steal her away to this perfect moment of contentment and peace, every step had been worth it. Every challenge had brought them closer together. Every hardship had made them stronger. She was Clara Mackenzie, wife of Colton Mackenzie, mother of 3, grandmother of 2, with more surely on the way, and resident of some of the most beautiful country God had ever created. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. And that, she thought as Colton pressed a kiss to her temple, was the very definition of a happy ending. Not because their life had been easy, it certainly had not been, but because they had faced every challenge together with love and determination and unwavering commitment to each other. The mountains would stand long after they were gone, silent witnesses to countless other love stories and adventures. But for now, they were home to the Mackenzie family, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other completely and worked together toward a common goal. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Clara and Colton remained on their porch, content in each other's presence, grateful for every moment they had been given together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new reasons to keep moving forward. But tonight, they simply sat together, two souls who had found their perfect match in the wild beauty of the New Mexico mountains, living proof that the greatest adventures often begin with a single moment of courage and end with a lifetime of love.